You want to be more intelligent, but you're not sure how to do it. You want better grades or perhaps just want to sound clever when hanging around with your friends. But you find, like many other people, that sometimes things go in one ear and come right out the other. You learn stuff and then you forget it. And when asked about various subjects, you can't always seem to articulate your thoughts. All you have to do is listen to the Sigma male to teach you how to use the Feynman Technique effectively. Hop along as I take you through the discussion. Make sure to like the video, hit subscribe, and that bell notification to get notified whenever we release a new video. Feynman's technique is a learning process whereby an individual explains the idea they are trying to master to themselves. It is a form of simplified learning which is aimed at mastery of specific concepts. This technique is named after an American physicist named Richard Feynman. He was famous for teaching himself complicated ideas. Richard Feynman was able to break down complex scientific ideas into understandable form through this technique. He taught himself various mathematical topics like infinite series, trigonometry, advanced algebra, analytical geometry, and calculus even before entering college. He's not the only one to have applied this technique. Albert Einstein was said to have used the highly effective technique as well. Albert Einstein put it right when he said that you don't know something well if you can't explain it to a child. This means that if you can't break down a concept down into understandable bits using simple language, then there's a chance that you don't understand it well. Having a clear understanding of a concept is the ability to describe it concisely and precisely. If you want to explain something to someone, you need to know the things or terminologies the person could possibly understand. So how does this actually work? First of all, you have to have a topic or something you want to know more about. Let's talk about how babies are made, what happens before we're born, what happens to our body during the act that's making babies, and what happens during pregnancy. If you've seen those books or videos about how babies are made, you'll know it's all quite complex. But you certainly don't have to be especially clever to be able to explain this to someone else nonetheless. Sometimes when you research a topic, the words seem difficult. If you want to really understand something, you must be able to read those words and then simplify. Feynman once famously said, "You might know the name of a bird in all the languages of the world, but in the end, you'll know absolutely nothing about whatever the bird is. So let's look at the bird and see what it does. That's what counts." It would be best if you learn early enough the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something, according to Feynman. It would help if you started with a topic, then write down everything you already know about this topic on paper. You could, of course, use a computer, but first, do this on paper, and then write it up after on a device. This will also help. The second step is to take out all the jargon you just wrote down. Now, just tell yourself that you're going to explain all this to a 6-year-old, not to your friend who's in his 20s. This means adding a lot of explanations in your case. You're describing what happens in a woman's body, so you must explain all the body parts. You can't just say uterus without explaining what it is and what its function is. This is a kid you're talking to, and you must take it that he doesn't know much. According to Feynman, we often just use words we don't fully understand, and by pretending, we're explaining something to a child. It will really let us understand if we actually know what we're talking about. You'll find that when you do it this way, there will be gaps in what you know. You'll know some stuff well, but there will be parts of a subject you don't know that well, whether it's a woman's reproductive organs or blockchain technology. So, step 2 is to look at where those gaps are where you could properly relay the correct information to your 6-year-old student. This is where you have to go back to the source material and learn again what you might have read before. Do some reading and then go back to your gap and fill it in using simple language your student can understand. This will maintain a thorough understanding of the topic and prevent what some people call the illusion of knowledge. Now, when you filled all those gaps in, make sure one thing in that all the language is yours. You haven't just borrowed it from a book because 6-year-old children wouldn't read books. You should try reading aloud what you've written down, and if you think the student wouldn't get it, then simplify it again. Do this until you're 100% sure your student will get what you're saying. You now have taken something fairly difficult and made it very learnable. Well done! You're becoming an excellent teacher. Now comes the best part. You actually have to teach that young student what you've learned. You don't have to always do this, of course, but if you really want to know what you've understood your subject matter, then go out and teach someone. It's one thing having something in your head and writing it down, but it's another being able to convey that information. So, someone understands if you're studying for an exam, say, on American independence, then find someone younger than you and explain to them what happened. If they get it then, you've succeeded. A 6-year-old kid might not always remember how television works after explaining to him, But if that kid understands what you're saying because you've laid it out so simply, you've done well. There's a big difference from explaining things using jargon to explaining things in the most basic language. So, if you can't explain your subject to a 6-year-old, maybe you just have to do more in science matters though. Maybe you are still in school or university, and maybe you just want to know something better. Now's the time to take out a piece of paper and write down what it is you want to know. You can now start the process we've talked about. Be assured that this technique works, and by using the Feynman Technique, you can pretty much learn anything you want. Of course, some books might already be difficult for you, but then you have to find a teacher that's already used the technique and broken the subject matter down. You see this a lot with philosophy. You have people like Kant, Hegel, and Nietzsche that are very difficult to understand. We actually found people online who use this technique to get through medical school, and we found lots and lots of people who have used this technique to get through high school. We found teachers and lecturers on forums saying how incredibly effective the method was, and you can find people saying things such as this all too often. We hear a lecture and can quote back parts of it verbatim, but that does not mean we understand the concepts, just that we have remembered the words. The better test is to try to explain the concepts in your own words to someone who isn't in your field, or, as some have indicated, the proverbial 5-year-old to do this. We have to simplify the language and very often use some sort of meaningful metaphor. If we struggle in doing this, then there's likely a hole in our thinking that needs to be repaired before moving on. Basically, to master Feynman's technique, follow the 4 simple rules. Define what you want to learn. Make a list of everything you wish to learn and then write it down. The rest of the learning process will be cleaner and more efficient if you are more detailed. Choosing the subject to study is the first step to applying Feynman's technique. Avoid being ambitious by writing down what you want to understand in clear terms. Also, be careful not to merge 2 or more concepts, i.e., try to separate any complex idea you wish to understand and take it one after the other. State your initial understanding of the concept. Do as if you're explaining the concept to a child, who will only understand when you break it down to its simplest form. Every jargon should be written in a simple or understandable form and must be brief. Determine your area of weakness. After the second step, some understanding gaps might have been discovered. Endeavor to fill it by going back to the source. This is where learning actually happens. In this step, you ask yourself what is wrong with your explanation of the idea and also what is missing, and then refer to the source material. If you can't adequately describe anything, go back and review, investigate, and relearn the topic until you're more or less confident in your explanation. Record new information. Organize new knowledge. Put your notes together and start telling a story with straightforward explanations. Achieving this is proof that you totally understood the concept you're trying to learn. Another way to know if you fully mastered the concept is by explaining it to someone with no prior knowledge of it. Feynman's technique will aid you in understanding fully what you're trying to learn. It is a useful tool when you're faced with a difficult subject matter. It also improves your teaching skills, since it involves teaching yourself or a child the concept just to understand it. And it improves your ability to apply critical thinking techniques. That's all. See you in the next one.